The herald of the hollow sky. The wind that scoured the Nevada desert was not merely cold, it was a skeletal caress, whispering of things that should not be. It carried the fine grit of ancient dust, but beneath that, Logan Mercer swore he could taste something else. A metallic tang, like old blood mixed with ozone, clinging to the back of his throat. He was a geophysicist, a man whose life was built on seismic data, geological strata, and the predictable churn of tectonic plates. Yet the anomaly that had summoned him to this forgotten stretch of alkali flats defied every principle he knew. It had appeared overnight, a crater, not merely a depression, but a wound, perfectly circular, almost a mile across and plunging hundreds of feet into the earth. No meteor shower had been logged, no seismic shock wave registered by any observatory on the planet. One moment, the desert was an unbroken canvas of ochre and sagebrush under a tapestry of indifferent stars. The next, this colossal pockmark had simply manifested, as if the earth itself had exhaled a silent, devastating breath. Logan's truck, a battered Ford F-150 laden with an array of sensors, ground its way over the increasingly uneven terrain. The sky, a bruised purple at this pre-dawn hour, pressed down with a leaden weight. He had driven for 8 hours since the last flickering outpost of civilization, leaving behind the comforting hum of data servers and the faint aroma of lukewarm coffee.
Now there was only the whine of the tires, the mournful sigh of the wind, and a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence wrapping itself around the truck, stealing away the very vibrations of the engine. He ran a hand over his close-cropped hair, the stubble on his jaw scraping under his palm. His eyes, usually sharp and analytical, were shadowed with a fatigue that went beyond lack of sleep. It was the exhaustion of confronting the impossible. His mind, trained to categorize and explain, was already straining against the edges of this new reality. The initial reports had been fragmentary, whispered by awestruck geologists and baffled military personnel who had been the first to survey the site. They spoke of a crater rim so sharp it looked freshly carved, of rock formations twisted into impossible geometries, of an oppressive quiet that swallowed sound. As the first faint streaks of sickly green light painted the eastern horizon, Logan saw it. A dark maw against the flat expanse, perfectly round, a geometric anomaly in a world of organic curves. It looked less like an impact scar and more like a cyclopean eye staring blankly at the indifferent sky. There was no scattered ejecta, no blast zone, no telltale signs of violent entry. The desert floor simply ended, giving way to an abyss. He parked his truck a quarter-mile from the rim, the designated perimeter. The air grew perceptibly colder here, a chill that had nothing to do with the pre-dawn hour. It carried that same phantom scent, ozone and something else, something metallic and profoundly ancient, like the inside of a forgotten tomb. The sand beneath his boots felt strangely dead, devoid of the microscopic life that usually teemed beneath the surface. He shouldered his pack, heavier than usual with specialized magnetometers, gravimeters, and a portable ground-penetrating radar unit. Each piece of equipment felt like a fragile shield against the encroaching unknown. The walk to the rim was unnerving. The ground sloped almost imperceptibly, drawing him towards the edge. The silence deepened, pressing in on him, stealing the echo of his own footsteps. He could hear the blood thrumming in his ears, feel the exaggerated beat of his own heart. His breath plumed in the cold air, a ghostly exhalation. When he finally reached the edge, he peered over. It was vast, a perfect bowl, hundreds of feet deep, the walls sloping down to a floor that was still shrouded in shadow.
The rock formations along the inner walls were smooth, almost polished, gleaming with a faint, unnatural sheen under the nascent light. They weren't the fractured, chaotic patterns of a typical impact. Instead, they seemed to flow, like molten rock frozen mid-motion, but with a disturbing regularity, a repeating pattern that hinted at something deliberate, not accidental. He took out his field binoculars, adjusting the focus. The floor below was a mottled gray, featureless from this distance, but he could almost feel its density, its alien stillness. He deployed a small drone, its rotors a surprisingly loud buzz in the oppressive quiet. He watched its ascent on the tablet screen, a tiny mechanical insect bravely venturing into the mouth of the Leviathan. The drone descended slowly, relaying thermal and spectroscopic data. Everything came back anomalous. Temperature readings were inconsistent, fluctuating wildly in small pockets. Spectral analysis showed trace elements that didn't belong to any known terrestrial geology. There was a faint, almost imperceptible hum picked up by the drone's microphones, a sound just below the threshold of human hearing, like the grinding of immense subterranean gears. Logan began his descent. A narrow, temporary path had been cut into the rim by the initial survey team, spiraling down into the darkness. He moved slowly, deliberately, his boots crunching on the loose shale. The air grew heavier with each step, denser, as if the pressure of the surrounding earth was squeezing in on him. The metallic tang in the air intensified, coiling in his nostrils, a sickly sweet odor that made his stomach clench. About a third of the way down, something shifted. It wasn't seismic, not a tremor. It was subtler, a disquieting lurch in his equilibrium. For a brief, dizzying moment, the slope of the path seemed to tilt not downwards, but sideways. He stumbled, catching himself on the rough rock face, his heart hammering against his ribs. He blinked, shaking his head. Just fatigue, he told himself, the strange light playing tricks. The sensation passed, leaving behind a faint nausea. He continued, his senses heightened. The silence was no longer merely profound, it was active, a hungry thing that seemed to devour sound before it could fully form. The drone's distant hum, which had been a comfort, now sounded distorted, warped, as if struggling against an unseen current. His shadow, long and attenuated in the growing light, stretched out ahead of him, a dark, elongated echo of his form. As he stepped over a particularly jagged rock, he noticed it. The shadow didn't just follow, it seemed to lag, then catch up with a subtle, unnerving jerk. He stopped, holding his breath, watching it. He took another step. The shadow rippled, then seemed to detach from his feet, stretching out a foot or so beyond him, a separate, darker stain on the gray rock, before snapping back into place. Logan frowned, his rational mind scrambling for an explanation. Optical illusion, residual dizziness from the earlier disorientation, a trick of the uneven light. He walked again, slowly. The shadow stretched, then hesitated, its edges blurring, as if trying to pull free. It felt less like a projection of light and more like a reluctant companion, a dark twin with its own slow, deliberate rhythm. He picked up his pace, and the shadow, for a terrifying instant, seemed to remain in place, a static blotch on the ground, before rushing to catch up, sliding over the rock with an unnatural fluid grace. He stopped again, breathing hard. The shadow coalesced around his feet, still and dark, perfectly normal. He tried to dismiss it, but a prickle of unease had begun to crawl up his spine. As he neared the crater floor, the air grew thick, almost viscous. The faint hum from the drone had resolved into a deep, resonant thrumming, vibrating through the rock beneath his boots. A low-frequency rumble that resonated in his bones, making his teeth ache. It felt less like a sound and more like a pressure, a steady, immense force pushing in on him from all sides. He finally reached the bottom, stepping onto the flat, gray expanse of the crater floor. The drone hovered ahead, its rotors barely visible in the dim light, its data stream now filled with static. He checked his own portable gravimeter. The needle was pinned, oscillating wildly at the extreme end of its range, indicating gravitational anomalies so profound they defied terrestrial physics. Magnetic readings were equally chaotic, pointing to immense, fluctuating fields emanating from directly beneath him. He looked up. The sky, which had been bruised purple, was now a sickly pale yellow, the color of ancient parchment. And it wasn't whole. High above the crater rim, where the vast dome of the heavens should have been an unbroken expanse, something was wrong. Fine, hairline cracks had begun to spread across the firmament like fissures in a pane of brittle, ancient glass. They spiderwebbed outwards from a central point directly above him, delicate and terrible, catching the emerging light in their sharp edges. And through those deepening fractures, he glimpsed not the deeper blue of the stratosphere, nor the void of space, but something else entirely, something dark, immense, and formless that seemed to breathe. Logan's gaze snapped down to his shadow, now lying perfectly still at his feet. But it was no longer merely a shadow. It had deepened in hue, becoming an absolute black, a rent in the fabric of sight. And slowly, impossibly, it began to peel itself from the ground. First its edges sharpened, then it lifted, a flat, two-dimensional cutout, rising until it stood before him, wavering slightly, a silent, featureless silhouette. Its head, a formless smudge of absolute darkness, tilted. It stared at him, or rather, through him, with an emptiness that felt colder than any desert night. A wave of profound, bone-deep terror washed over Logan. His scientific training, his rational mind, shattered like the sky above him. This was not geology, this was not physics, this was something else, something that had crawled from a place beyond human comprehension, and it had opened its eyes upon his world. Part 2. The detached shadow stood before Logan, a tear in the visible spectrum, an absolute absence of light mimicking his form. It did not move, did not speak, yet its presence was a scream in the silence, an impossible violation of natural law. Logan's breath hitched, a dry, rattling sound in his throat. His mind, a fortress of scientific reason, buckled under the weight of the impossible. His hands, trained to calibrate delicate instruments, trembled uncontrollably. He wanted to run, to scream, to bury himself in the familiar, comforting dirt of a world that made sense. But the crater floor felt less like solid ground and more like the membrane of something vast and sleeping. And the sky above him was a shattered mirror, reflecting a truth too terrible to bear. The shadow remained, a sentinel of non-being, absorbing what little light reached it. It didn't menace, didn't threaten. It simply was, and in its existence lay a horror more profound than any violent assault. It was the universe itself, casually breaking its own rules, unraveling the very fabric of reality before his eyes. He slowly backed away, one tentative step after another, his gaze locked on the inky silhouette. As he retreated, the shadow did not follow. It merely pivoted, a smooth, fluid motion that lacked any musculature or bone, always facing him, always observing. He turned his back on it, a desperate, foolish act of defiance against the impossible. His eyes darted to the fractured sky. The cracks were deepening, spreading like gangrenous veins across the pale yellow canvas, and behind them the breathing sensation intensified. It wasn't air moving, it was the expansion and contraction of something immeasurable, something that pulsed with an unimaginable ancient rhythm. He could almost feel the pressure of its cosmic exhalations pressing down through the broken firmament, making the air in the crater thick and heavy, like breathing underwater.
The incessant, low thrumming that had begun to vibrate through the ground grew louder, evolving from a distant hum into a deep, guttural resonance that Logan felt more than heard. It resonated in the hollows of his bones, a constant, invasive pressure that made his teeth ache and the fluid in his inner ear slosh unpleasantly. His portable gravimeter was screaming, its needle dancing wildly, far past any measurable terrestrial force. His GPR unit, meant to map subterranean structures, flickered erratically, displaying only chaotic, non-Euclidean patterns, like viewing a dimension folded in on itself. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his marrow, that whatever was causing this was directly beneath him. The crater floor, previously featureless, began to subtly ripple. Not an earthquake, but something else, an internal shifting, a slow, deliberate movement from below. A network of faint, glowing fissures, like molten copper threads, began to spread across the gray expanse of the crater floor, emanating from a central point. They pulsed with a faint, sickly luminescence, illuminating the rock with a fleeting, internal light. The ground groaned, a deep, organic sound, like stone suffering a colossal indigestion. Then, with a sound that was a wet tearing and a grinding of impossible scales, the earth split open. Not a geological fault line, but a deliberate, slow rupture, as if a colossal, unseen hand was peeling back the surface of the world. The glowing fissures widened, revealing a chasm that plunged deeper than the crater itself, radiating an unholy light. And there it was. It defied easy description, a monolithic entity of impossible scale, rising slowly from the depths. It wasn't stone, not metal, not crystal. It was organic. A colossal vertical structure, hundreds of feet high, its surface not smooth, but rippling with a terrible living texture. It was the color of dried blood and bruised flesh, a deep venous purple interwoven with streaks of obsidian black. It was too vast to comprehend at once, its top still lost in the gloom of the newly opened chasm. Its surface was covered in a grotesque tapestry of forms that Logan's mind struggled to categorize. Thousands upon thousands of eyes, of varying sizes, were embedded within its flesh-like hide. Some were wide and ovular, pulsing with a dull inner light like dying embers.
Others were slit-like, reptilian, darting erratically as if tracking unseen movements. Still others were perfectly spherical, jet black, reflecting Logan's terrified face in their polished depths. They didn't blink, didn't weep, but simply stared, a collective, silent witness to its emergence. Some of these eyes were weeping, not tears, but a thick, viscous fluid that looked undeniably like blood. It oozed slowly from their rims, tracing crimson paths down the monolith's impossible surface, collecting in grotesque pools in its crevices before dripping soundlessly back into the glowing chasm from which it came. The air, already thick with the metallic tang, now reeked of iron and something else, something sweet and cloying, like decomposition. Interspersed among the myriad eyes were intricate bas-relief carvings. They weren't chiseled into stone, they were grown into the monolith's living surface. Ridges of bone-like material forming patterns that made Logan's vision swim. These were star maps, but not of any constellation he knew. They depicted impossible geometries, celestial bodies that writhed and pulsed, galaxies that spiraled into each other like hungry mouths, and nebula that bled across the void. He saw stars rotting, collapsing into themselves with an inner light that felt like agony, and pathways between realities that bent and fractured space itself. The carvings seemed to shift and subtly reconfigure as he watched, like a living diagram of cosmic agony.
The monolith continued its slow, inexorable rise, its sheer mass displacing the very air, creating an oppressive vacuum around it. The thrumming intensified, becoming a pervasive infrasonic roar that vibrated through Logan's entire body. It was a sound that bypassed his ears and went straight to his nervous system, setting every nerve ending alight with agony. His vision blurred, not from tears, but from the vibrating internal pressure. He dropped his equipment bag, the heavy instruments clattering uselessly on the groaning earth. Then the sound changed. It wasn't just a thrum anymore. It was a cacophony, a multitonal symphony of dread that pulsed from the monolith. High-frequency shrieks mingled with deep, grinding moans, creating dissonant chords that physically assaulted him. He stumbled back, clutching his head, his ears ringing with an unbearable pressure. This was the sound that deformed flesh. He could feel it working on him, a subtle, insidious force. His teeth began to ache excruciatingly, feeling loose in his jaw. The bones in his skull seemed to vibrate, threatening to splinter. His skin felt stretched, taut, as if something beneath it was trying to push its way out. He retched, a dry, painful spasm, his stomach convulsing. The metallic taste in his mouth intensified, becoming an acrid burn. He could feel something else too, a deeper, more profound vibration resonating within his very organs. It was as if his liver, his kidneys, his heart were all being subtly, painstakingly rearranged. He fell to his knees, gasping, the air hot and thick with the monolith's emanations. Through the haze of pain and nausea, a vision flashed behind his eyes, unbidden and terrifyingly vivid. It was not a memory, not a dream. It was an intrusion. He saw a universe, vast and indifferent, but wrong. The stars were not pinpricks of light. They were swollen, weeping sores in the blackness, oozing corrupted light into the void. Galaxies spun not with cosmic grace, but with the slow, agonizing churn of decaying flesh. Tendrils of dark matter, thick and segmented, snaked between dying suns, drawing them into unseen maws. It was a universe where entropy was not merely a law, but a disease, consuming all things, turning creation into putrefaction. The vision lasted only a fraction of a second, but it burned itself into his mind, leaving a residue of cosmic despair. Then he heard them, voices, not with his ears, but directly inside his skull, a chorus of whispering, clicking, guttural sounds that felt like claws scraping against the inside of his cranium. They were counting down. In a language utterly alien, yet somehow innately understood, each sound was a number, a terrible countdown towards an unknown, inevitable conclusion. 1, 2, 3. Each numeral resonated with a profound, chilling finality. They were not counting to something, but counting down from something immeasurable, a vast cosmic ledger of time and being. He screamed, a raw, ragged sound ripped from his own throat, but the sound was swallowed by the monolith's roar, distorted by the fracturing sky, and muffled by the detached shadow that still stood, unmoving at the crater's rim, its featureless head tilted slightly, as if listening. The monolith continued to rise, its blood-weeping eyes fixed on nothing and everything, its star map carvings hinting at truths that could unmake sanity. The vibrations intensified, threatening to tear Logan apart from the inside. He could feel the reality around him beginning to fray, the edges of his world blurring, melting. The countdown in his skull continued, each number a hammer blow against the walls of his sanity.
He was no longer a scientist, no longer a man. He was merely an audience, forced to witness the dawning of an incomprehensible horror, a birth that would rend the very fabric of existence. Part 3. The roar from the monolith was no longer just a sound, it was a physical force, a tidal wave of vibrations that hammered Logan's body, threatening to shatter him from the inside out. He lay convulsing on the crater floor, his hands clamped over his ears, a futile gesture against the sonic assault that bypassed bone and flesh, vibrating directly in his brain. The metallic tang in the air had thickened to a syrupy viscosity, coating his tongue, burning his throat. Blood, hot and coppery, trickled from his nose, a mere physical manifestation of the deeper hemorrhaging occurring within his very being. His vision, already blurred by pain, swam with phosphenes and shifting shadows, the world a kaleidoscope of agony. The monolith continued its slow, inexorable ascent from the chasm, its colossal mass eclipsing the fractured sky. The myriad eyes embedded in its pulsating flesh surface darted and dilated, reflecting the internal agony of the cosmos Logan now felt coursing through his own veins. The blood dripping from some of those eyes was no longer merely scarlet, it shimmered with iridescent, unearthly hues, catching the sickly light like oil slicks on an ocean of primordial dread. The star maps carved into its living hide pulsed with a faint internal light, their impossible geometries twisting and shifting, mirroring the unraveling of reality around him. As the sonic assault intensified, so did the visions. They were no longer fleeting glimpses, but full-blown intrusions ripping through the fragile veil of his consciousness. He was no longer merely seeing them, he was experiencing them. He floated in a void where stars were not points of light, but immense, diseased organs, their stellar cores oozing a viscous, corrupted light. Nebulae were not clouds of gas and dust, but vast, festering wounds in the fabric of space, bleeding cosmic effluvia into the blackness. Then he saw them, the titanic creatures. They drifted in the void, silent and incomprehensible. Their forms were a blasphemy against geometry and biology. Bodies of calcified bone, impossibly sharp and angular, intersected with tendrils of pure shadow that writhed with an inner hungry light. They possessed too many limbs, too many mouths, too many eyes, or perhaps not enough of any. One resembled a colossal crystalline spider, its legs arcing for light years, each segment dripping with something akin to frozen starlight. Another was a tangled mass of living cables, each one ending in a maw lined with obsidian teeth, perpetually tearing at the dying timelines of the universe. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace that belied their immense scale, not propelled by thrust or force, but by a subtle, inherent twisting of space itself, folding the void around them. These were not predators, they were gardeners of entropy, tending to the decay of creation, their silent existence a testament to a universe that had gone profoundly, cosmically wrong. They were the architects of the star maps on the monolith, the living embodiment of its grotesque constellations. The voices in his skull, the clicking guttural chorus, continued their relentless countdown. Each number was not just a sound, but a concept, a truth hammered into his consciousness.
9, they hissed, a sound like chitins scraping on granite, and Logan felt a timeline fold in on itself, a million possibilities dying in an instant, their echoes reverberating through his skull. 8, they chanted, a wet, sucking sound, and a sensation of profound loss, of something ancient and terrible being extinguished, washed over him, leaving him gasping for air. He realized the horror of the countdown. It was not merely counting to something, but counting down the very threads of existence, unraveling the universe itself, one agonizing iteration at a time. Each number was a subtraction, a negation, a finality. And with each count, the pressure intensified, the vibrations growing more violent, the air in the crater thick with the metallic tang of cosmic dissolution. His own body was rebelling. His skin felt stretched taut, burning from within. He could hear a faint, high-pitched ringing in his ears, a sound that seemed to originate from the very core of his being, like the shriek of overworked machinery. He felt a deep, pervasive nausea, not just from the smell or the sound, but from the impossible pressure distorting his internal organs. He could feel his very cells vibrating out of sync, the delicate machinery of his biology protesting this alien interference. He looked at the monolith again, now fully risen from the chasm, its apex scraping against the underside of the fractured sky. It pulsed, a slow, deliberate rhythm, like an immense, diseased heart.
The blood dripping from its eyes now flowed faster, forming rivulets that snaked down its purple-black hide, collecting in glowing pools on the crater floor. The star maps on its surface seemed to glow with a malevolent intelligence, their impossible constellations now making a horrific sense in the context of his visions. The pieces, disparate and terrifying, began to coalesce in Logan's shattered mind. The organic nature of the monolith, its pulsating surface, the blood-like secretions, the myriad eyes watching, the internal thrumming, the way it had risen from the earth rather than impacted it. The deep guttural groans that emanated from it, sounds that mimicked the agony of birth. The subtle deformations of gravity and reality around it, as if its presence was warping the very laws of physics to accommodate its existence. The visions of dying stars and feeding entities, the countdown to extinction. It wasn't a meteor, it wasn't an artifact, it was something far more ancient, far more terrifying. A womb, a cosmic womb. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stripping away the last vestiges of his sanity. This colossal living structure, rooted deep within the earth, was not a geological anomaly or an alien relic. It was a vessel, a gestation chamber, nurturing something of unimaginable horror. The Earth itself was merely its birthing canal, the crater, an open wound in the planet's flesh. The creature he had seen in the sky, breathing behind the fractured glass, was not merely an observer. It was the parent, or perhaps the child, or even a precursor to what was currently gestating within this monstrosity. The incessant low frequencies, the high-pitched shrieks, the visions of universal decay, the fear that now clawed at his very soul. It wasn't random. It was sustenance. The being gestating within fed on fear, on the dissonant frequencies of unraveling reality, on the dying echoes of forgotten timelines. He, Logan Mercer, was not an investigator. He was an offering, his terror a delectable nutrient for the nascent god. The detached shadow at the crater's rim, an absolute black silhouette, seemed to grow in density, its featureless head now angled directly towards the monolith. It was no longer staring at him, it was watching, the womb, waiting. The sky above the crater, now a sickly, sulphurous yellow, shattered further. Not just cracks, but entire sections of the firmament seemed to dissolve, revealing glimpses of the void beyond. And within that void, the dark, immense, formless thing that breathed, now closer, its colossal presence pressing down, making the air in the crater impossibly heavy. He could feel its gaze, not on him, but on the monolith, a silent communion of cosmic horrors. The countdown in Logan's skull resumed, each number echoing with a sickening finality. 7, the voices rasped, a sound like a galaxy being crushed. 6, they hissed, like a million realities winking out of existence. The ground beneath him groaned louder, a profound, agonizing sound of tearing and stretching. The molten copper fissures on the crater floor widened, glowing brighter, revealing glimpses of more impossible structures writhing in the depths. The monolith pulsed faster, its blood-weeping eyes now wide, staring blindly upwards at the broken sky, at the immense breathing presence beyond. It was responding, communicating. It was a rhythmic contraction, a primordial tremor, signaling the imminent arrival of something utterly alien, utterly devastating. Logan pressed his face into the gritty, vibrating earth, trying to block out the sounds, the visions, the horrific truth. But there was no escape. The terror was not merely in his mind, it was in the air, in the ground, in the very fabric of existence. He was trapped in the birthing chamber of a god older than galaxies, a god that fed on the suffering of creation. The countdown continued, relentless, inescapable, each syllable promising the end of everything he knew. The world was not ending, it was merely giving way to something far, far worse. Part 4. The countdown in Logan's skull, a chorus of clicking, guttural whispers hammered at his sanity. 5, 4. Each number was a chisel blow against the architecture of his mind, peeling back layers of perception, revealing abyssal truths. His body, already a vibrating vessel of agony, felt on the verge of spontaneous disintegration. Blood streamed from his nostrils, ears, and the corners of his eyes, a testament to the internal hemorrhaging caused by the monolith's sonic assault. The air, thick with the metallic reek of cosmic blood and ozone, pressed down on him, viscous and suffocating. The monolith, a colossal pulsating organ of bruised flesh and obsidian, pulsed faster, its rhythm now frantic, a drumbeat of imminent gestation. The myriad eyes embedded in its surface rolled wildly, some weeping torrents of iridescent oily blood that flowed down its impossible hide, pooling on the crater floor in glowing, shifting puddles. The star maps carved into its living flesh writhed, their impossible constellations now illuminated with an inner malevolent light, depicting pathways between dying universes, hungry maws of black holes, and titanic entities that fed on despair. The ground beneath Logan bucked and heaved, not with the familiar tremors of an earthquake, but with a sickening internal lurch, as if the earth itself was convulsing. The molten copper fissures on the crater floor flared, casting ghastly dancing shadows that stretched and warped, mirroring the distortion of reality. The chasm from which the monolith had risen widened further, revealing an abyssal maw that pulsed with the same unholy light as the monolith's surface. The sky above, a shattered dome of sickly yellow, groaned. The cracks that spider-webbed across it deepened into gaping rents, revealing not the emptiness of space, but the vast, formless thing that breathed beyond. It was closer now, its presence a crushing weight, its silent exhalations rippling through the fragmented atmosphere. Logan could feel its unseen gaze, not on him, but on the monolith, a cold, indifferent observation of an inevitable cosmic birth. Then the monolith began to split. Not a fracture, but a deliberate, organic separation. A seam, glistening with more of the iridescent blood, began to open along its colossal vertical axis. It widened slowly, agonizingly, with a sound that was a wet tearing of immense muscle and a grinding of bone-like chitin. The sound was amplified, echoing through the crater, merging with the internal countdown in Logan's skull. 3, the voices hissed, and the monolith's fissure widened further, revealing a glimpse of the impossible darkness within. 2, they chanted, a sound like universes collapsing, and the rend in the monolith's flesh became a gaping wound. And then, with a final deafening crack that seemed to split the very air, the monolith tore itself open. It wasn't merely opening, it was birthing. The two colossal halves of the organic structure peeled back like the petals of a monstrous carnivorous flower, revealing the horror that had gestated within. From the depths of the cosmic womb, a being of impossible scale and grotesque beauty began to tear its way out.
It emerged slowly, deliberately, its colossal form unfolding into this reality, each agonizing inch a violation of all natural laws. It was insectoid, yet utterly alien. Its primary body was a segmented, chitinous mass, shimmering with an oily, iridescent sheen, the color of dried blood and polished obsidian. Colossal, jointed limbs, too many to count, unfolded from its torso, each ending in razor-sharp claws that scoured against the tearing monolith, sending showers of corrupted blood and bone-like fragments raining down. These limbs were articulated with impossible geometry, bending and twisting in ways that defied physics, propelling its immense mass from the womb. Its head was a nightmare of biological excess, not one mouth but a multitude, rows of circular lamprey-like orifices, each lined with concentric rings of obsidian teeth, opened and closed with a wet sucking sound, revealing throats that glowed with an internal sickly green light. Tendrils of bone and sinew writhed from its head, tipped with eyes that pulsed with malevolent intelligence, scanning the crater, the sky, and Logan himself. Its primary eyes, immense and multifaceted like a fly's, reflected the shattered sky and the terrified man below in 1,000 distorted facets. The creature let out a scream. It was not a sound of pain or triumph or even anger. It was a frequency, a multitonal, discordant shriek that resonated with every cell in Logan's body, stripping away his last reserves of sanity.
It was a sound that vibrated not in the air, but directly in his bones, in his very marrow. He felt his skeleton begin to crack. A sickening internal crunching sound echoed in his ears, and he knew with chilling certainty that his bones were fracturing under the impossible pressure. His vision, already bleeding, now truly ruptured. Scarlet streaks exploded across his sight, mingling with the phosphenes and the terrifying image of the emerging god. He writhed on the ground, his body a battlefield of internal torment, his screams silent, swallowed by the creature's overwhelming shriek. The metallic taste in his mouth was now overpowering, and he could feel the warm gush of blood from deep within his throat. The world around him began to melt. The edges of his vision blurred and dissolved into surreal nightmare. The crater walls, once solid rock, flowed like wax, their forms twisting into grotesque, fleeting visages, like faces screaming in silent agony. The ground liquefied into a churning, primordial goo, iridescent and foul-smelling. Floating organs, vaguely recognizable as human hearts or livers, but impossibly large and pulsing with an inner light, drifted aimlessly through the melting landscape, detached and indifferent. Dimensions collapsed, folding in on themselves, creating impossible folds in space where horizons bent and inverted, and the distant broken sky seemed to plunge into the earth. He saw the detached shadow at the crater's rim, still standing, still dark, but now it too began to stretch, its form rippling, dissolving into the expanding chaos, as if it were merely a tear in a fabric that was now unraveling completely. As the creature, the herald of the hollow sky, fully tore its way from the cosmic womb, its colossal form eclipsing the entire crater, Logan understood the truth, a truth so profound and horrifying it rendered all other knowledge meaningless. The crater wasn't created by an impact. There was no meteor, there was no collision. It was an opening contraction, a gestation, a birth.
The first breath of a god emerging into this universe. The planet itself was merely a placenta, the sky its amniotic sac, now ruptured. He was not merely witnessing the end of his world, he was witnessing the beginning of something else, something monstrous and utterly alien. His existence was merely a fleeting spark in the shadow of its terrible awakening. The creature's myriad mouths opened wider, emitting another shriek that twisted the very air. Its bone and shadow tendrils lashed out, not at Logan, but at the sky. The shattered firmament, already fractured, began to respond. The immense breathing thing behind the glass, the formless presence, pulsed with a terrible, eager energy. The edges of the sky, where the remaining illusion of blue once held sway, began to ripple and contort, drawing inwards, changing. Logan could only watch, his body broken, his mind shattered, as the tendrils of the creature began to reshape the sky. The ethereal blue, the familiar expanse, melted away, replaced by something fleshy, organic, and pulsating. It was forming a dome, a living, pulsating membrane stretching across the entire horizon, a grotesque, crimson-veined ceiling to this new, terrible reality. The air grew impossibly hot, then cold, then hot again, as if the very atmosphere was being remade. The final number echoed in his skull, 1. And then, a horrifying, profound silence descended, broken only by the wet, slapping sounds of the sky reshaping itself. He tried to scream, but only a gurgle of blood escaped his lips, his voice stolen by the unfolding nightmare. The Herald had arrived. Part 5. The final guttural whisper of 1 reverberated not just in Logan's skull, but through the very substance of his being, a cosmic chime signaling an irreversible conclusion. Then a profound, agonizing silence descended, broken only by the wet, slapping sounds of the sky reshaping itself. His body, a ruined vessel of splintered bone and hemorrhaged organs, lay sprawled on the dissolving crater floor. Blood, hot and viscous, filled his mouth, a metallic tide that threatened to drown him from within. His vision, already a kaleidoscope of scarlet streaks and phosphenes, now fractured completely, mirroring the sky above. The herald of the hollow sky, fully emerged from its cosmic womb, was a monument to impossible horror. Its colossal, chitinous form, shimmering with an oily, iridescent sheen, dwarfed the entire crater. The myriad lamprey-like mouths on its head opened and closed in a silent, sickening rhythm, revealing throats that glowed with a sickly green light. Tendrils of bone and sinew, tipped with pulsing eyes, writhed at its head, reaching, exploring, already interacting with the dissolving reality. Its primary, multifaceted eyes reflected the chaos, 1,000 distorted images of a world unraveling. Its immense insectoid limbs, articulating with impossible geometry, flexed and shuddered, sending tremors through the melting landscape. These tremors were no longer geological, they were the very pulse of a nascent god, charting its dominion. Above, the sky was no more. The shattered dome of sickly yellow had not merely cracked, it had peeled away, revealing the vast, formless presence that had been breathing behind it. And now, that presence was not merely a void, it was flesh. Logan watched, his remaining consciousness reeling as the tendrils of the herald lashed out, not at him, but at the firmament itself. Where the familiar blue once reigned, a grotesque, crimson-veined membrane began to unfurl. It stretched across the horizon, pulsating with a slow, deliberate beat, like an immense, cancerous organ. The edges of this living dome seeped into the dissolving air, absorbing the last vestiges of atmosphere, replacing it with a thick, viscous medium that hummed with unseen energies. The familiar stars, those distant, comforting pinpricks of light, were swallowed by this burgeoning, fleshy ceiling, replaced by immense, throbbing capillaries that pulsed with an inner, diseased light. The world around Logan was no longer merely melting, it was being repurposed. The crater walls, once solid earth, now flowed like liquid flesh, oozing down into the chasm from which the Herald had been born. These cascades of liquefied earth twisted into grotesque forms, half-formed faces screaming in silent agony, skeletal hands reaching out from the slurry, only to dissolve back into the primordial goo. The floating organs Logan had glimpsed earlier were now everywhere, vast and obscene, drifting through the viscous air like jellyfish in a polluted ocean. Hearts the size of boulders pulsed with a terrible slow rhythm. Livers coiled like immense glistening serpents. They were not just organs, they were the detritus of dying timelines, the discarded viscera of realities consumed. The air itself was changing. It grew impossibly heavy, humid and cold, then scalding hot, all within the span of a breath. It was no longer air, it was a breathing medium, thick with the metallic tang of cosmic blood, and something else, a cloying, sweet stench of decay and gestation, the breath of the Herald. He struggled to draw a breath, his lungs feeling like calcified sponges, his chest crushed by the atmospheric pressure of this new reality. The Herald lowered one of its colossal, many-jointed limbs. It didn't touch Logan, but hovered above him, its shadow an eclipse that swallowed the melting ground. The pulsing eyes on its tendrils and the multifaceted eyes on its head seemed to fix upon him, not with malice, but with a terrifying, indifferent curiosity, the way a titan might observe a speck of dust. He was insignificant, an accidental witness, a discarded fragment in the wake of its cosmic birth. His mind, already shattered, was now subjected to a final, devastating onslaught of understanding. The visions of stars rotting like diseased organs, of titanic creatures feeding on timelines, they were not mere glimpses into another universe. They were prophecies, blueprints. This was what the Herald brought. This was its purpose. It was not merely a destroyer, it was a recreator, reshaping reality in its own image, turning the universe into a vast living charnel house. It was the cancer of existence, the entropy made manifest. The countdown hadn't been for its emergence, it had been for the unraveling of everything. Each number a thread cut, a law broken, a reality extinguished. The hollow sky was not a metaphor, it was the promise of a universe consumed, its void filled with the pulsing flesh of this new god. He looked at the creature, its multifaceted eyes reflecting his broken form, and saw not evil, but something far more terrifying, utter, profound alienness. It had no concept of good or bad, only of existence, of hunger, of transformation. He was merely food for its senses, a fleeting whisper of fear to sustain its awakening. The ground beneath him dissolved completely, giving way not to a fall, but to a sickening liquefaction. He was no longer lying on the earth, he was floating in a primordial broth, a churning mix of liquefied rock, glowing ooze, and the occasional, drifting, impossible organ. The pressure on his body was immense, distorting his limbs, twisting his torso. He felt himself stretching, elongating, his form beginning to lose its human shape, becoming part of the melting landscape. The Herald, its work on the sky nearing completion, let out a low, resonant thrum. It was not a scream this time, but a sound of satisfaction, a vibration that resonated through the fleshy dome above, causing it to pulse brighter, veins of crimson and purple snaking across its inner surface. The creature then began to move, its colossal limbs sinking into the liquefied earth, drawing its immense body across the landscape with a terrible organic grace. It was not going anywhere. It was becoming the landscape, integrating itself with the newly formed reality, spreading its influence, its flesh, its horror. Logan felt his mouth open, a raw, ragged hole in his distorting face. The blood gurgled, but for a final, agonizing instant his voice returned, a sound ripped from the deepest, most primal part of his being, a scream born of absolute cosmic despair. It was not a scream of terror for himself, but for everything that was, everything that had been, and everything that would never be again. A scream for the stolen stars, for the dying timelines, for the universe itself, now remade into a living, breathing tomb. The scream stretched. It didn't just end, it elongated, distorted by the liquefying air, absorbed by the pulsating fleshy dome above. It became infinite, a reverberation in the newly formed reality, a timeless echo of final, utter annihilation. Logan Mercer, the geophysicist, the man of science, ceased to be. His form, his consciousness, his very existence stretched and dissolved into the primordial soup, becoming one with the grotesque living landscape, a single infinitesimal tremor in the vast, unspeakable birth of a god. The sky, now a vast pulsating dome of crimson flesh and throbbing veins, settled into its new terrible configuration. From within its depths, new impossible stars began to bloom, not points of light, but weeping, diseased organs, oozing their corrupted light into the new hungry void. The herald of the hollow sky had arrived, and the universe would never be the same.